Alright, so in this video, I'm just going to be continuing to talk about the opening for Deathmatch, and now I'm just going to move on to um, deciding how many barracks to make, how many rages to make, um, and whatnot. So yeah, we'll just decide on the barracks and the ranges. So again, you should have already seen how many stables you should make. So up next is determining how many barracks and ranges. So I usually like to go with barracks next. So in determining how many barracks I'm going to make, again, this one probably actually depends a little bit more on their civ in most cases than my civ, because the only time that you're going to really want to add barracks out of like aggression is if you're going to go for like, let's say you're civ like Celts or something, or Slavs or Aztecs, and you're going for champs, right? That's where then it's like civ independent, where you're just going for that unit because that's your good unit. But in a lot of other cases, um, your decision to go for barracks is actually more determined based on enemy civ. So if the enemy has a paladin civ, then usually they're going to add 4 stables paladin, um, and so we want to counter their paladin. So if we do get help, what we want to do is add barracks to counter their paladin by using help, right? We don't want to make champion against help, it just doesn't really make sense. So yeah, we'll go barracks. And again, the thing to keep in mind is that early on, paladin can actually beat halberdier. You can actually trade like basically cost efficiently with it, because again, the paladins are made, well, they're made slower than helbs. But the thing is, if you fight equal number of paladins versus equal number of helbs, then I think it's around cost efficient for the paladins. And so we want to make sure that we outnumber the paladins. So usually going for more than 4 barracks is the right idea, so that we can outnumber the paladins. So like I said, probably standard is like 5 or 6 barracks if you're going up against a paladin civ. But then again, maybe against like a civ like Franks, you want to make more, like 8. Um, but like, again, 6 probably could work out fine as well. Just that it can be a lot about unit control, so not as much about the numbers you have either. And then the other thing to keep in mind is if they're an elephant civ, then usually they're going to go pretty heavy on elephants, and you do want a lot of helps to counter that. So I would say at a minimum you want 6 barracks against elephant civs, and then and probably at maximums like 8 or something like that. Um, so yeah, so that's kind of how to determine how many barracks. So again, if you're against a paladin or an elephant civ and you believe they're going for one of those 2 units, then add barracks. And so like last game we actually talked about how many stables to build, and we said that 4 stables for Teutons is usually the standard. However, we don't want to usually make the 4 stables right away, especially if we're against a paladin civ, because we're going to expect that if they're like a paladin civ, or even if they're elephant civ, that they're going to rush us with cavalier and paladins. And if we make 4 stables, then we'll have more paladins, but paladins don't really do a very good job of killing other paladins fast. It'd be much better if we had halberdiers instead. So instead of adding, again, this is guys Vikings, but we'll pretend they're like Franks or something, right? Instead of adding 2 more stables, what I'll do here is add um, I'll add the barracks here. And usually what I like to do is I can add the buildings pretty quick, but and you'll be able to do this too. So like obviously I'm doing it quite slow because I'm pausing and stuff like that. But if I'm going to add 6 barracks, I'll just go like this. And again, one thing, sorry if I keep pausing. One thing is you got to remember is that if you build the barracks in the back, then all the helps when they get created are going to be spawning in the back, and you're going to probably end up making units up, or you're going to probably end up making buildings in front of your town center as well. And so if you build the barracks in the back, then when the helps get created, they're just going to sit there, right? Ideally, what we want is the helps to spawn in a location where they're going to pick up on the enemy paladins, and they'll be able to help defend your villagers without you having to task them. So the ideal place to build the barracks is going to be in the location that's facing your opponent. So in this case, the opponent is probably somewhere in this area here. And so we want to make sure we make the barracks in the front here instead of the back. And that can be something that's hard to do because villagers actually naturally spawn on the left side of the town center. So it might be easier for us to just build the barracks on the left side here, just to match where our villagers are at. But it's very important that you build that barracks here, because if the help spawn here and your villagers are building in the back, which is again safer for you later on to have villagers building in the back, but the helps will pick up on the paladins and they'll chase them back here. Versus if they just spawn up here and the villagers are up here, they're just gonna be unprotected. So I just we'll go. We already have 2 barracks there, and then maybe just add a couple more here. And again, just try to get the spacing down. It's something that it's gonna be hard in the beginning, but it's something you'll pick up on in time. And the other thing is that you want to be able to or having the grid mod helps. So check that out. There's a lot of different ones in the mod center. Check that out. That'll definitely help you get better at placing buildings. So yeah, so now we have our 6 barracks, and again, that would do very good against defending versus like a paladin civ, and maybe even an elephant. But usually for elephants, I like to go 8 barracks. I'm not really sure if that's like super ideal, but it works pretty well for me, so I do it. So yeah, I guess that is kind of like if you're going against one of those civs, I think like a paladin or elephant civ, I think it's kind of easy to know how many barracks you need. Again, it's like 6 or 8. That's usually what I go for. Um, the tougher thing could be like if you're going up against, like, say you're like Britons or something, and you're going up against Koreans. So neither civ gets like amazing cavalry, and so the question would be, do you go for barracks at all if they're not going to raid you and not going for and they're not going for um, they're not going for cavalry. Is there any point in a civ like Britain's making barracks, right? Because you'd say, oh well, the arbalists are the best unit, so why don't I just make a bunch of ranges and go for arbalists? Actually, with a civ that doesn't get good cavalry, um, if you're not going to go for helbs to counter their cavalry, then it can be good to go for barracks to make champion if you get champion. And there are some other cases where maybe they don't get champion, but it's still worth to make the 2-handed swordsman. But champion are actually in if you match the resources of a champion against against the knight line, champions actually do slightly worse than paladins, and fully upgraded champions, that is, versus fully upgraded paladins do slightly worse. If you compare if you had 2 champions, which is basically 130 resources, and you compared it against 1 paladin, which is 135, a champion just does slightly worse. So champions actually are quite a good unit now, especially with the supplies technology, which reduces their food, which, by the way, every civ gets. So yeah, if you are a civ like Britons and you're going up against another civ that isn't a cavalry civ, that probably um, isn't going to make knights, it's still good to add barracks so you can get champions out. I would say the biggest weakness of champions is that they lack mobility, so they're not going to be used for rushing. And then the other thing is that they aren't like super great against like a lot of range units. They die rather quickly, and they do cost gold, so you do want to be kind of aware of that. Like, you don't want to just, if your champions are basically just dying before they get to the enemy units, then are they really worth spending gold over? I mean, you might as well just make halberdier or something, you know. Well, I mean, that's kind of what I think. So I don't know if it's really necessarily worth it to go for a ton of barracks. I think that there could be. I was thinking about I was kind of like thinking through some things where there might be a situation where it is worth it to make a lot of barracks. But for now, I think that if you are in a situation where you're like Britons or something like that, and you're going up another non-cavalry civ, usually what I like to do is add probably like 3 to 4 barracks and go for champions. And again, the benefit of going for champions here is that they're going to help you establish map control. Just having those extra units is going to be really nice for sending them to the sides to raid and stuff like that. It's quite good, because the thing is that in low numbers, even civs or even units like arbalists aren't going to kill champions, right? And yeah, it's better than just having an all arbalist army, honestly, because the thing is that all I have to do if one guy goes all arbalist, all I really have to do is mix in a couple onagers with the champions, and I'll win that fight quite easily, and then the champions can go on to do raiding or whatever, right? So, but yeah, I wouldn't overcommit to making a lot of barracks. The other downside is the more military buildings you build, the slower you're gonna be able to expand and build castles elsewhere and town centers and stuff like that. So you have to be kind of careful about making too many military buildings sometimes. Um, so anyways, hopefully you guys are kind of starting to understand like how many barracks you need. Again, 6 to 8 is usually against like a paladin, and that's just for the halberdier. Again, if you're against a non-cavalry civ and you don't get good cavalry yourself, again, around 4 barracks for champions is not a bad idea. just to get you some map control early on. That's really, I think, a good plan. If you're a stuff like Celts or something like that, then what you basically do, if you're not gonna, with Celts you could go for Paladin actually, and it's not a terrible idea, even though they aren't super strong, just because of the mobility of Paladin. But you could also go for Champion. Again, I would probably just substitute out the stables in that particular case for the barracks. So instead of opening 6 stable or 4 stable, uh, you know, I don't know, instead of opening like 4 stable and like 6 racks, you could just go like 10 racks and then just have like four of the racks is making champions, 4 or 6 of them making helps if you're against the paladin civ or something like that, right? Um, that's kind of my recommendation there on that particular in that particular case. All right, I know the video is getting kind of long, but I think this next part isn't too hard to explain, although I'll probably over-explain it. So the next thing we're going to do is determine how many ranges do we need. And by the way, the cost of, just let me just finish this up, the cost of helps and champs is kind of, the gold cost is pretty negligible. I think to make 15 champions and sort of, to max queue of barracks is only 300 gold. So compared to a stable, the gold cost is very negligible. So it's really hard. I wouldn't worry too much about how much gold you're spending with the barracks. I mean, you can keep track of it. Again, you could say four barracks is around 1,000 gold, um, even though it's 1,200, but just an estimation, right? Um, but yeah, you shouldn't have to worry too much about gold costs as far as the barracks go. But yeah, getting onto the ranges. So how many ranges do we build? So determining kind of the number of ranges to build, I think has a lot to do. Again, it depends on how good your units are, but also I think how good is your siege as well? Because there are some civs that get decent, they get decent range units, but actually the siege units are also going to cost gold and wood, and usually, or in some cases, they're actually it's more cost efficient to make the siege units versus the range units. And sometimes it's fine to make both, a combination of both of them. Um, but in this particular case, Teutons do not get Bracer. They're missing Bracer, and they don't get Heavy Cavalry or Arbalist. So this is a pretty clear case where you're not going to go for the range unit. Hand Cannoneers, in my opinion, are basically like they're like a non-factor in Deathmatch. They've been nerfed so hard with their accuracy that I just, there's very few cases where I feel like they're actually worth making. So I wouldn't bother too much with them. Yeah, because I think I tested something and I figured out that the Castle Age Crossbowmen with Bracer is actually stronger than Hand Cannoneers in terms of the DPS against most units. Against infantry, they're probably, the Hand Cannoneers are still better, but against most other units, I think the crossbow were better. Anyways, so in this particular case, the range units aren't that good, and the other factor is that the siege units are the Siege Islander, Heavy Scorpion, and Bomber Cannon. Those are all can be good units to make. So yeah, maybe instead of range units, if you're against infantry or something like that, or elephants or so, you can just go for heavy scorpions instead. Use them as a substitute for the range units. And of course, like the Siege Islander is always, it's pretty much always a good unit to make. It does a lot of damage, and it counters basically all these siege units as well. So yeah, I would I mean, Bombard Cannon kind of counters Siege Islander, but in Deathmatch it can be hard to micro the Bombard Cannon. So basically SO if you do a really good job, or basically SO and Deathmatch counters all siege units. So if you get Siege Islander, I'd usually go for it. Um, so yeah, so that kind of so like if you guys didn't y'all didn't pick up on it already. So for Teutons, well, the last thing of course you gotta look at the unique unit. So again, the Teutonic Knight is actually, I think it's cheaper now gold wise. It's still quite expensive food. The food cost is still expensive, but I think the gold cost may have gotten reduced or something. But anyways, the Teutonic is another strong unit. It's quite slow, so again, this is going to be one of those things where um, you have to kind of figure out what do you, if you're going to make this unit, how are you going to substitute it out for, um, like what unit are you going to substitute for? So in this case, it probably makes sense because it's a food and gold unit to substitute out. Maybe don't make as many paladins or something like that, um, and then go for the Teutonic Knight. Uh, but yeah. I'm kind of diverging here from what we were talking about, which was the ranges. So let me try to get us a little bit back on track. But that's kind of how castle units go. You got to determine the strength of the castle unit in the particular matchup you're in, and then if it is good, then figure out what you would what you're going to substitute out. Um, so yeah, in this case it'd be the knights. But again, you could probably still open 4 stables and switch into 2 tonic knights later on. It's probably not a big deal. Okay, so let's get back to the range units. So I'm gonna pick a civ that has a bit better range units. So in this particular case, we have the Japanese, and here's an interesting case. They get fully upgraded cav archer and arbalist, and they also get all of the range upgrades. So the question is how many ranges do I make, and which unit do I make? Do I make arbalist? Do I make heavy cav archer? Well, this is kind of how I feel about it. Arbalists, in terms of their cost efficiency, or in terms of like if you match the equal cost or equal number of resources, Arbalist and Heavy Cav Archer, the Arbalist will have a higher DPS than the Cav Archer. But the thing is, in Deathmatch, or just in the game in general, is that the Cav Archer is actually made, at least as far as I know, is made at the same time as an Arbalest is in Imperial Age, and so and the Heavy Cav Archer is just a stronger unit and more mobile. So if both of them are made in the same amount of time, one is a little bit more costly than the other, but they're both made in the same amount of time. I typically feel like Cav Archer is just better to make right away, just because you're going to be able to trade a lot better in the early game fights and be able to get a lot more map control earlier compared to somebody that goes for Arbalest. And again, getting the map control early is essential in Deathmatch because the thing is if I go for Cav Archer right away and I'm able to establish control of like a hill like this versus somebody that's going Arbalest, getting a castle up on this hill is quite important because it's right outside this guy's main gold, and I can put a lot of pressure on. I have the hill advantage, so I actually do more damage as well. So you think about it, like if I get Cav Archer on this hill and I'm against Arbalest, I'll actually still have a higher DPS than him because I have the hill advantage, right? So my kind of thinking in terms of deciding between Arbalest and CA, where both are viable, is typically I go for the CA. There might be some exceptions to that. Honestly, I really can't think of many. Even in cases where even in cases where you don't get Parthian tactics, it can still be good to go for the CA because the thing is that the Parthian tactics it allows this heavy CA to do bonus damage versus pikemen and have the extra armor. But honestly, like as you become a better and better deathmatch player, I think the armor becomes kind of less and less of a factor because as your unit control improves, your Cav Archer will take less and less damage, and the armor upgrades aren't as essential. It's more about keeping your DPS from your range units quite high, and heavy CA will allow you to do that. Again, Parthian tactics doesn't really it doesn't affect the DPS, really directly. So it's just yeah. And then again, if you don't get dumb ring, well, that affects both Arbalest and CA. So again, that doesn't affect your decision whether or not to make CA. The only real thing that I think determines your decision whether or not you can make Arbalest and CA is whether or not the Civ actually gets like if you don't get a heavy Cav Archer, it's gonna be better to make Arbalest if you do get it. So in one particular case, you have Malay. Malay is a Civ that doesn't get heavy Cav Archer, so it's definitely not worth it making CA. But in Malay's case, you also get you get heavy Scorpion. So the thing is that for Malay, it might just be better to go for heavy Scorpion versus Cav Archer. Again, you lose the DPS or you lose the mobility of the Cav Archer, but you probably have a higher DPS with the heavy Scorpion. So that's kind of how I would kind of rank the range units at least. The hand cannoneer, not really a factor. Skirms you really shouldn't make in most cases, but against maybe a lot of range units it can be okay, but it's kind of questionable because it gets countered pretty hard by siege and cavalry. So I would really try to avoid making skirms again. But yeah, Arbalest highest DPS, but um, the make time is the same as CA. So like overall in the beginning, the DPS of your army is going to be higher with CA. CA are going to cost more, but they again have more HP, more mobility. And then lastly, we have like the siege, where again siege onager is going to be your best like counter to all other siege units. Heavy Scorpion will do like siege onager isn't going to help as maybe much against like infantry and like cavalry and stuff like that, whereas Heavy Scorpion would help a lot more. And Heavy Scorpions again, both these units are slower, but Heavy Scorpion is going to offer a higher DPS than a unit like the CA. Again, you're lacking mobility, but in Malay's case, It's melee is much more about making really strong pushes with elephants and siege versus making a lot of split pushes. So yeah, again, and then let's get into how many ranges are you gonna make. So if you queue up a range with 15 archers, you're gonna spend around like it's like 700 gold around-ish, I think. I'm not gonna do the math here. It's around 700 gold, and if you go for CA, it's around 900. It's 900 gold, which again I just round to 1,000. So if you're, let's say you're Huns, right? Where's Huns at? Huns, let's think it's Huns. So Huns, you're probably gonna go for stable paladin again because you get good paladin. You might make some helbs if the enemy's going for cavalry themselves, and then well, in this particular case, the CA are cheaper. But let's again just assume that each range is 1,000 gold or so, right? So to spend all 10,000 gold, you can make 4 stables and 6 ranges, and that's gonna basically spend 10,000 gold. With Huns, the CA are actually cheaper, so you'll probably save like 1,000, or you'll save, yeah, you'll save around 1,000 gold, which is good for, like you usually want to save like 1,000, 2,000 gold to put into siege and like trebs. So in Hunt's case, you save the gold when you go 6 ranges. You actually save 1,000 gold or so, so you can put that into the siege rams or trebs. Um, but let's say you're another civ. Let's say what's another civ to to look at? Like Mongols could be like in general for me. I just go 6 ranges. If I'm gonna go for ranges, I usually go for 6 ranges, just because again, if you like most you're not investing a lot of gold in champion if you do go for champion. Um, if you are going for champion, you're probably not going for paladin, so you're not investing a lot of gold here. Gosh, I don't know how to explain this. Um, mm, mm, yeah, like I mean, you're really not going for. How do you explain this? You're really not going for like at most you're going for 4,000 gold here. If you're going for 4,000 gold here, you're going for 0 gold here basically. And to spend the rest of the 10,000 gold or around that much, you're gonna go for like 6 ranges here. Again, this is only 900 gold for 6 ranges, so it's a little bit under. It's like 5,400 gold. And again, that'll save you some extra gold for you'll save some extra gold for siege. Um, and if you're going for Arbalest or something like that, you'll even save more gold. So I hope that makes sense. Like, uh, yeah, the one case in which you're not going to go for like a lot of maybe like a lot of range units or something like that is like if you're transitioning into like a castle unit. So in this case, Mangadai is obviously superior to heavy cav archer, but sometimes it's still nice to get heavy cav archer out early because let's say you just want to establish map control, because the thing is that castles take longer to build than ranges do. And so by going for Mangadai, you're actually going to be like your military numbers are going to be lower early on. And let's say there's like a pretty important hill in the middle, right? Well, if you just go for castles right away, you're basically going to give up this hill because there's not going to be really any way you're going to be able to capture it, because it's kind of like it's like equidistant to the enemy. And if you go for castles and they go for other like standards buildings, they're gonna have quite a bit more military buildings or military than you in the early game. And so sometimes it'd just be good to go for CA. But let's say you don't want to commit to 6 range CA because that's a lot of gold to put in CA, and you really want to get into Mangadai and like Onager, right? So what you could do there is you could go for like 3 or 4 ranges instead, and then just to try to contest this area, and then switch into Mangadai once you get your castles up, right? That's usually my recommendation. That's also the case like a civ like Portuguese. So Portuguese is another civ where the organ guns are like superior to Arbalest pretty much in most cases. So you don't want to usually go for a 6 range Arbalest unless you really need like map control some area. It's often better just to go for maybe a couple ranges, like 3 ranges or so, and then go into transition into organ guns. Um, so yeah, so hopefully that makes sense. Um, yeah, so hopefully that covers everything. We reviewed the stable, how many stables to make, kind of went over the number of barracks to make. Again, people are gonna ask, how many barracks do I make with Goth? Well, I mean, that's kind of one of those things that there's not, just kind of try to do the math. Like Goths probably make the units like, what, 100% faster, over 100% faster. So instead of, if you're just gonna make full barracks, like six barracks is basically the equivalent to 12 barracks with other civs if you're goth, right? So I mean, there's not like a perfect answer to that. Like I don't have a perfect answer for that. That's just one of those things where try to do some math in your head here and figure out, is 12 barracks enough? If you were a normal civ, is 12 barracks enough? Probably, you know. So, and yeah, like Goth would be another case of where maybe you don't rush Cavalier because your Huskarls are fast and they're resistant to archer fire and stuff like that, right? And they're created faster, right? So not all these not all this is you can't just use everything I told you just like strictly, but it's just kind of a general guide. Um, so yeah, in the next video I'm just gonna go through some examples here, and I'll go through some examples, and we'll just talk about like different unit com or different building numbers for different matchups. All right, thanks for watching. I'll see you in the next video.